Perfect. Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this e-government 8-panel discussion on cybersecurity threats. Through this panel, we will focus on the role and challenges of national cybersecurity centers in dealing with the increasing electronic threats. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel discussion, and I'm delighted to welcome 3 very experienced subject matter expert speakers to join us today. Introducing General Kit Alexander, who led America's National Cyber Security Agency, established and focused US Cyber Command, and he is co-CEO of IronNet Cybersecurity. Introducing Dr. Henry Berson, the UK government cybersecurity ambassador, and introducing Mr. Conrad Prince, the former deputy head of the UK Cyber Agency, GCHQ, and is now a senior advisor to a leading global vendor in cybersecurity solutions. Shortly, I will ask them to introduce themselves and make some opening remarks, after which I will ask some questions to open up the discussion on this important topic. There will be an opportunity at the end of the panel to ask our guests any questions on that subject. For now, let's move on to the reason behind selecting this topic. The governments all around the world, the private sector, and the individuals are increasingly dependent on the internet and digital technology. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we faced significantly accelerated in the dependence of the internet, driving ever greater digital transformation of public service delivery and government's use of data, and creating new opportunities for government and business as they adapt to deliver more and more services online. Yet, in this increasingly connected world, the enhanced efficiency and affordability of these changes can be so easily damaged by cybersecurity risk. Last year, we also saw an enormous increase in cyber attacks, including vaccine hacking and aggressive ransomware attacks. Many were linked to the pandemic. In 2017, the government of Kuwait published its first national cybersecurity strategy, which identified the need to follow international best practices by establishing a national cybersecurity center to help enable the best possible digital security and resilience for the government, the private sector, and individuals. The need for such a center is greater now than ever before, and we can see this as a global trend. This panel discussion draws together leading experts from UK and US, discuss the critical role of the NCSC, or the National Cybersecurity Centers, should now play in Kuwait in order to promote the digital transformation. And now I will pass on to our honorable guests in this panel to introduce themselves and provide some opening remarks. We will start with General Kit Alexander. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Engineer Elial. We are on the brink of a digital arms race where adversaries are using cybersecurity attacks as an element of national power for everything from destruction to intelligence gathering to extortion, an existential economic threat. Attacks continue to grow in sophistication, size, and number, as Engineer Elial said, and they are emerging as the biggest risk and crisis of our generation. A little over 30 years ago, Kuwait faced an existential threat from Iraq. I was proud to be part of the International Coalition to Free Kuwait. Today, Kuwait faces an existential threat to its economic future and its financial future this time in cybersecurity. As Engineer Leal said, governments and nations are dependent on the internet. It is the economic future of many of our countries. The rapid changes in technology, the doubling of information, the doubling of devices, protocols, makes the internet and protecting it twice as hard every year. We don't have the number of people that we need. We will never have those. Governments, both the public and private sector, have to work together. This doubling of technology creates a great opportunity for economic growth for every country. It also creates a huge risk, a technical risk, much of which Engineer Leal mentioned. I want to just talk a little bit more on that risk. First, these threats, if you look at what's happened over the past year, SolarWinds, and then the Microsoft attack, both of those impacted almost 50,000 companies. These are the largest attacks we've seen in history, the biggest threat to our nations, and it went around the world. To solve problems like this, civilian companies and governments have to work together in every country, ours and in Kuwait. This has to be a coordinated response. We see the government's responsibility to protect companies. We see companies' responsibilities to let the government know that something's going on. That, in my mind, is building something like an air traffic control picture for cyber. How do you see those threats that are hitting companies? How do those companies share it together, and to whom do they share it? This is where the National Cybersecurity Center comes in. They are the link between the private sector and the government in helping to defend that country. And this is why we believe, and I believe wholeheartedly, that what you're doing in Kuwait to set up that National Cybersecurity Center is exactly the right approach. It's had great success in the UK, and it's what we are doing here in the US as well, setting up that center and driving it forward to bring the link of how your commercial companies can show they're being attacked, have that seen by the government, respond and protect the country, the economic future of your country, and concurrently let the government work with other nations to solve that threat to the country. I believe this is the future of cybersecurity. This is where we're pushing our country as well. When I look at what's going on, we all have a long ways to go in this area. Building that air traffic control picture, if you will, for cybersecurity is a difficult thing. And that's where countries and companies like ours need to work together to make this possible. I'm proud to be part of that. I will tell you that I was proud to be part and get my first trip to Kuwait 30 some years ago, and proud to meet many of the great people of Kuwait. So with that, back to you, Engineer Leal. I'll be followed by Conrad Prince.
Engineer Real, requesting you to please unmute yourself. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, General Keith. And now we will hear from Dr. Henry. Dr. Henry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Engineer Lyle. It's really a huge honour to be here at the 8th E-Government Forum in Kuwait. As the UK government's cybersecurity ambassador, my background is a mixture of industry first and then government. Now, it's particularly timely, this meeting, because it's almost exactly 5 years to the day since the announcement of the creation of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, which I think it's fair to say in that short time has helped the UK become a global leader in cybersecurity. Its creation showed real foresight, driven by the understanding that better cybersecurity was critical to our nation's future prosperity. At that time, you may remember, the scale of incidents in the UK and worldwide, like the TalkTalk hack, had shaken public confidence in the government's response. So it was clear that there needed to be a single focal point in government to make sense of the complexity of the situation and coordinate response to major incidents. So I look forward to bringing my experience of seeing national centres being developed both in the UK and around the world to our panel discussions today. And it's particularly, I'm particularly happy to be back talking here, as I've been involved with the development of CITRA's implementation of the Kuwait's national strategy over the last 4 or 5 years, working with Engineer Lyall and colleagues. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. I'll pass now to Mr. Conrad. So please introduce yourself and provide some opening notes.
Thank you very much, Engineer Lyall. It's a great pleasure to be here today. It's great to have the chance to join you. So my name is Conrad Prince. I spent nearly 30 years of my life working for the UK government, primarily at the UK's Cyber Intelligence and Cybersecurity Agency, GCHQ, where I was the deputy head of that agency for about 8 years. And after that, I was the UK government's first cybersecurity ambassador. So I was Henry's predecessor and worked on a number of different things around cyber strategy in the UK during that time. And I have wonderful memories of visiting Kuwait as cyber ambassador to talk about the kind of issues that we're discussing today. So I now work in the private sector. I advise businesses and other governments on cybersecurity. I do research for a think tank. And I guess I now, like everyone on the panel, I'm able to see cyber both from a government perspective and from a private sector perspective. I worked in the British government both before the creation of our National Cybersecurity Centre and after we set it up. And so I saw firsthand the tremendous difference that creating that single centre to coordinate our national approach to cybersecurity made. It made a huge difference. And I really think it is the secret to the UK's success in tackling cyber issues. As Keith said, you know, we've all got a long way to go, including in the UK. We've got some things right. We've got some mistakes we can learn from. But one of the things we absolutely got right was setting up our national centre. And it's great to see the progress that's being made in Kuwait in that area. And I really look forward to talking more about that later on in this session. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you all for your important remarks. And now we shall move on to the first panel question. So I'll forward the first question to General Keith. So General Keith, can you tell us about how you see the cybersecurity threat today and what it means for the digital agenda?
Thank you, Engineer Lyall. As I mentioned earlier, I see and we see a digital arms race that's going on in cyberspace with both nation states and criminals involved. These attacks represent a huge threat to every country's prosperity and national security, especially as we look to make the most of the digital agenda, vital to the future prosperity of every country, including Kuwait. When you look at the amount of cybercrime that's going on, some estimates put cybercrime as high as $6 trillion a year. Last year, between Q2 and Q3 in our country, we saw a 350% rise in ransomware. Hostile states use cyber attacks to steal government secrets, spread false information and propaganda, destroy critical infrastructure like power and water supplies, and steal intellectual property. When you look at all those threats going on, and you think about then the attacks that we saw in SolarWinds and the Microsoft hacks, these are increasing in intensity and in numbers. And it shows how sophisticated and determined the adversaries are in this space. It's now a strategic risk for every country, including Kuwait. It's probably one of the biggest threats to national and economic security there is. One of the things that I would like to just hit on when we talk about the threat is when we think about the threats, when we think about nations, one of the issues that we face and Kuwait faces is the fact that today in our country, every company defends itself. It is difficult for those companies to see and understand attacks in time to do something about it. So if you think about those attacks that are ongoing, they can't share the fact that they're being attacked. And as a consequence, that inability to see and understand the attacks at network speed and to share that information leads to the result of being attacked for 6 to 9 months without anyone knowing it. That was the case in SolarWinds. 18,000 companies were impacted by SolarWinds. It took over 6 months before FireEye Mandia, Kevin Mandia, actually revealed that attack. Now think about where we need to be and how we solve this problem and where the National Cybersecurity Center comes in. From my perspective, we need to create both the ability for companies to see threats that go beyond the current way of tracking those, and we need to share them amongst companies and sectors. Think of this as the commercial side of it, and share it with the National Cyber Center so they can see what's going on. The National Cybersecurity Center then becomes a center for understanding, if you will, the air traffic control picture for cyber. But this has an even bigger value for the nation. Imagine right now, 90 companies out there, each with 10 people protecting it. Every one of those people are working really hard to protect their company. And down the street is another company doing the same thing. Now imagine if we network those together with the National Cybersecurity Center. Instead of 10 people each defending 90 individual companies, imagine if they work together. 900 people working for the collective defense and sharing that with the National Cybersecurity Center that could provide an air traffic control-like picture for the country of what's going on and allow the government to do its mission to defend the nation. So when I see these threats, I also see this great opportunity, and I applaud the steps that Kuwait is taking to set up the National Cybersecurity Center. I think this is a huge step and important for the future economic security of the country. Back to you, Engineer Liao.
So, Dr. Henry, given the scale of those threats, how should government be thinking about their responses?
Well, thank you, Lyle. Governments, as Keith has eloquently said already, need to take a leading role in addressing cybersecurity issues. And that's what we in the UK have increasingly understood as we've moved through two 5-year cycles of developing a cybersecurity strategy and then implementing it. Having said that, our latest watchword in developing our next strategy is that government only needs to do what it needs to do. I mean, that may seem a truism, but getting that balance between what has to be led by government and what can be done as a result of government setting the framework is a key issue that needs to be kept in mind, because government can't do everything. It can't afford to do everything, but it does have this critical coordinating role. So just to reiterate, a critical point is for governments, as Keith has just said, to understand the scale of the threat. And we've been lucky in the UK in that our governments have recognised for more than a decade that cyber security threats are a top-level threat to the national security and economic well-being of the country, along with the other obvious ones like pandemics, terrorism, and more general warfare. And that's allowed us to put the right money behind, right investment behind it. Now, the next point I'd make on this point that governments can't do everything is cyber is, and we keep saying this, is a team sport, and it really is. And that means that team has got to be the whole of government, led by its central focus in the national centre, but it also involves industry, the whole of society, and increasingly international partners. We're only, as an organization, as a country, as strong as the weakest link in our supply chain. And therefore we have a very clear understanding that we in the UK with our partners need to invest in building the capacity of our friends and allies, because that will increase the strength of our own defence. More widely than just those aspects directly of cyber defence, we need to be working as a government, and this is true for every government, on how to develop cyber skills within the public, within the industrial workforce, and develop education and R&D in universities and industry, and also how to develop a national cyber industry, because a strong ability to defend oneself not just depends on input from government, it depends on developing that industry organically. And so that's a key, we can see that that will be a key thing for Kuwait to continue to do over the next few years. Obviously, there are the sort of backroom activities of introducing the right standards and regulations within a country. To improve standards, cyber standards in critical infrastructure and more broadly. And also another factor the government needs to look at is developing guidance and advice for all sectors of the economy on the current cyber threats and how to respond to them at a more basic level than creating the capability to monitor threats at a national level that again Keith has spoken about so comprehensively just now. So that, back to you, Engineer Lyle.
So, Mr. Conrad, from your point of view, what is it about a national cybersecurity center? Why it's so important?
Sure, thank you very much, Engineer Lyle. So in the UK, we set up our National Cybersecurity Centre in 2016. And before that, we had all sorts of different organisations in government that had some responsibility for cybersecurity. So we had CERT UK, the Computer Emergency Response Team, which was one independent organisation. GCHQ, my former organisation, had a responsibility. Our security service had a responsibility. And those are just three of the organisations I could name. The problem that this brought was that it meant that there was a lot of duplication of effort, which was very wasteful and it was very inefficient. And there was real confusion both within the UK government and also within the private sector as to when a serious cyber attack happened, which government organisation had the lead, which government organisation a private sector company should go to for help. Was it the CERT? Was it GCHQ? Was it the security service? Who was it? And this was a real problem for us as we began to understand the scale, the sheer scale of cyber attacks that we're all facing, all of us, as General Keith has set out. So with the NCSC, we essentially merged all of those different organizations that I talked about that were working on cyber, all the parts of those organizations that worked on cyber. We merged those into one coherent organization, the National Cybersecurity Centre. And that gave us one organization in government that had the clear responsibility for understanding the cyber threat, for having that air traffic control picture, if you like, that Keith talked about, for monitoring it, and for responding to the most serious cyber incidents. And I think moving to having one organization has been a massive step forward for us. And you see a number of countries now that are following that model of having a single central point for coordination on cyber. Now, it's important to say that, of course, the NCSC does not do everything in cybersecurity in government. So, for example, our armed forces have the really important responsibility of defending their own networks against cyber attack. The police and the law enforcement in Britain, through our National Crime Agency, are responsible for investigating cybercrime and bringing cyber criminals to justice. So they carry out that policing function. But the NCSC has this central coordinating role. And it's a broad role. It's about broad risk management of cyber across the nation, not just responding to particular incidents. You know, it develops a deep view of the cyber threats that the nation is facing, and it leads on the strategic management of those most serious attacks. And it does other things as well. You know, it provides technical advice and policy advice on cyber. It engages across government, advising on how to achieve the best cyber protections. And critically, it works deeply with our private sector, advising companies that form part of the critical national infrastructure and beyond, collaborating with those private sector companies in order to share information, in order to have a kind of shared response to the cyber threats we face. And it also provides advice that's useful to the citizen around cyber protection. So this is a set of roles and responsibilities that's much broader than what might have been in a traditional CERT, for example. And by bringing all those bits together, we create an organization and we create a national effort on cyber that's much stronger than it would be if we had a lot of different organizations doing bits of the picture and cutting across each other and creating confusion. So I really think that pulling that into one place has been the secret of the UK's success. I mean, it's widely acknowledged as such. And it's sort of one of the best things that we've done, I think, in our 10-year work as a government, as a nation on cybersecurity. So the NCSC really has been the center of that work. Thank you.
So, General Keith, what about the private sector? What should boards be thinking about when it comes to protecting against cyber attacks?
Thank you, Engineer Liao. I think first, boards need to take the cybersecurity threat very seriously. They need to be clear about who is accountable in the company for cybersecurity and get appropriate advice and support if necessary. When I think about what's going on within companies here in the United States, the Security and Exchange Commission is increasingly looking at, do boards have people with cybersecurity experience? I think that becomes increasingly important for companies to make sure you understand the threats to the company. In doing that, there are threat standards and ways of looking at what and how is the company being defended. The board needs to understand their company's strengths and weaknesses when it comes to defending against those attacks, and they should have a cybersecurity strategy, an improvement plan, and make investment in cyber defense. When I look at it from my perspective, it means how are they meeting the standards, and does this improvement plan actually work? Is the company tracking that plan? Do they have an investment in that? Are they training their people, and are they working on it? I add in a second element in this area, which is, and are they working with their peers at network speed for the collective defense? And I think in this regard, I would also look at, are they talking to the National Cybersecurity Center on what they're seeing? Do they share that information? And does the National Cybersecurity Center understand that company, what they're doing, back and forth? I think that part, creating that infrastructure, if you will, that private company government interaction between the National Cybersecurity Center and the company becomes increasingly important. We're tracking a series of threats today, as I look at it from our company, and talking with private companies what's going on, sharing that with the government and saying, are you seeing this? Are you seeing this threat? And while we help protect private companies, the government now looks at that and spreads it across all the companies to make sure the nation is secured. I think that becomes important because every company is at risk, whether from a targeted ransomware attack, a rival trying to steal state secrets, or from being caught up in a much bigger attack like WannaCry or SolarWinds. And when you think about the WannaCry and the SolarWinds, there was collateral damage in parts of these. That means they may not have been the real target, but they were victims. And they could be victims in the future. And what that means is I'm concerned that this is not done. There's more to come. And when I look at the WannaCry and now I look at SolarWinds, what I see is a number of companies will face ransomware and other attacks by those who would extort information from companies. That's the economic future of these companies. So there's two sets of issues: destructive malware. Think of WannaCry and the attacks that came out of WannaCry, which destroyed the data on hundreds of thousands of systems in FedEx, Maersk, Merck, and other companies. Over $10 billion in damage from those attacks. Now look at what's going on with SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange. Many companies are now vulnerable to advanced future attacks. Getting out in front of that is where companies have to work together. So from a board perspective, understanding those threats, going back to the company and say, what are you doing now to ensure we're protected from this? Because extortion could be $1 million from that company just to get out from ransomware. Think about the impact on nations. In the United States, ransomware has grown to such an extent that the insurance companies are having trouble keeping up with paying off all of those debts. It's now got to be a huge loss even for the insurance companies. Imagine that. And when you sit on a board, there are a couple of risks to that company. It is not only the economic future, it's the liability. You lost your customer data. It's reputational risk, and your stock price if you're a public company goes down. So all companies need to be working with their governments on cybersecurity. This is where the National Cybersecurity Center comes in. Building that public-private partnership, I think, is key to the future of nations. I think Conrad brought out a great point. If you have a number of people that are doing air traffic control in cyber, who's in charge? What picture do you follow? Who sets standards? Who's responsible and accountable? And how does the nation now come back together? Each part of government has roles and responsibilities, even here in the United States. And so setting that up and getting this right is critical to the future of companies. I think the boards of directors need to look at the center for advice. What would you do in this case? Making sure that they are doing best practices and they're sharing information on those cyber threats that they see. We can't independently as a company defeat these threats. This is where a collective response is required and where the National Cybersecurity Center, working with other elements of the government and the government with other nations, can now change this whole dynamic. I believe the internet and what we see in cyber is our future. It is the greatest economic growth that we're seeing among companies around the world, and it's the greatest risk. Governments, nations need to take a step on how they're going to consolidate these capabilities. Boards are part of that. And I think critical for Kuwait, this National Cybersecurity Center, what you're doing is going to be a key element of that and a key element of the future. Thank you, Engineer Liao.
So, Dr. Henry, you advise governments all over the world. What best practice or practices have you seen with national cyber security centers?
Thank you, Engineer Liao. I mean, the first point I'd make is that the government needs to actually set up the national centre. It may be obvious, but they do need to set it up. Having said that, I see around the world that many countries are successfully adopting the model that we've adopted in the UK, here in the GCC, and across other areas I'm heavily engaged in, Southeast Asia particularly. Now, ensuring that the national centre is truly the single focal point for national level cyber threat monitoring and risk management is essential. And both the other speakers have made that point very clearly. So then the question, and it's to some extent in most countries, the critical question in setting it up is, where do you place in organizational terms that national centre? Who does it report to? And I know this is a question that's exercised your thinking in Kuwait. It needs to be, what I always say when I'm asked this question is there is no single answer for all countries. Each country has a history of how it's got to where it is. It has actually different structures of government, subtly different or not so subtly different. And those will determine where in government it's best to seat that national centre. But the overriding thing, in my opinion, is that centre needs to be able to gain the trust quickly of the whole of society, of industry and of the public, if it's going to fulfil its, and I'll steal the analogy from Keith because I love it, the air traffic control role of directing the flow of information, directing the flow of control of incidents. So establishing that trust across the whole of society, at the end of the day, I think it will determine where best to place it in the organisation. Now, having said that, the centre needs to develop really good relationships right across government, and it needs to be able to collaborate well with other government departments, including, and Conrad's already mentioned the fact that the armed forces in any country have an important role, but that role is really about defending their own networks because they're the only ones in a country that understand the particular military characteristics of those networks. Also, as we've worked hard on in the UK, the relationship between the national centre and the law enforcement authorities. So that would be the MOI in Kuwait. But in the UK, what we've done is we have a very, very strong operational link between the National Cybersecurity Centre and the National Cybercrime Unit, which is within our National Crime Agency. And so, although the NCSC is the focal point, actually where something is a straight matter of cyber crime and doesn't have a wider national security aspect to it, then our National Crime Agency takes the lead. So obviously there is a need to be able to have liaison between the national centre and the teams that handle within the country that handle the most sensitive data, the most sensitive intelligence, because that can be an important feed. So there may need to be some quite complex arrangements in that area. And also, as I said, the other key point is the relationship with the private sector, which Keith has spoken about. Often a key element there is developing trust, and with trust leads to timely exchange of the data both ways that's needed. And then finally, the National Centre does need to have a strong voice on issues around cyber standards, cyber regulation and so on, because those do form an important part of the country's response. But it's no good a country doing that on its own. They need to look to link with international collaborators to make best use of international standards and push those standards in the international forum. So thank you, Lyle. Back to you.
So a last question, I will forward it to Mr. Conrad. You work in both the government and the private sector, so how can the two best work together on cybersecurity? What do you think?
Well, thank you very much, Engineer Lyle. So, I mean, it is essential, as both Henry and Keith have said, that the government and the private sector work together to combat the cyber threat. It needs a whole of nation response. And of course, particularly because so much of our critical infrastructure, the national infrastructure that we depend on, power, water, banks, telecommunications, that's owns and sits in the private sector. And that is being targeted by countries and criminals who want to do us harm. And that's happening every day. So government and private sector needs to work together. As Henry has said, trust is a really important part of that. Government and private sector need to be confident about collaborating, sharing sensitive information about threats and so on. And you can build that trust in all kinds of ways. I think just engaging, talking together a lot is really important. That regular day-to-day collaboration, mutual support, not just when a crisis is happening, but actually having those conversations, that engagement before the crisis happens, before a really bad attack happens. That's really important because that builds up those relationships. I mean, one thing that I would point to in the UK, in our National Cybersecurity Centre, we have a scheme called the Industry 100, where the government brings in cyber experts from all kinds of different private sector companies. They come to the NCSC, they spend time with NCSC, they work together on shared projects. And that's a great way of building that collaboration, because whilst the government is always going to have some unique information and unique knowledge around cyber threats from that, air traffic control picture, so does the private sector. The private sector has its own insights into threats, but also, it's the experts in the private sector who understand the real nature of the threat to whether it's their banks that they operate or their water companies or whatever it might be. It's the people who run those systems that understands the threat. And so the government really needs to tap into, to build on their expertise and share their knowledge. So I think that's the crucial thing. I think it's a relationship of trust, as Henry said. I think you build that up through regular, ongoing engagement, through conversations, through sitting in each other's organizations, talking about the issues, sharing information, and you build that up more and more until over time you can share that information as soon as it happens, which is really what we need to be able to do to deal with this cyber threat. So it's an absolutely fundamental part of the solution, I think. And I think my final thought is that's why you need a single centre, because otherwise you don't have a single organisation in government that all of those different companies can come and talk to. They need one place that they go and talk to on cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think it's the time to wrap up this amazing discussion. We can conclude that having a cybersecurity center here in Kuwait is a need now. It is important to consolidate all the capabilities, not only to lead in the management of cybersecurity activities across the government and provide guidance and advice to citizens and business, but also to develop strong international relationships in the global cybersecurity community for the purpose of information sharing. At the end, I would thank my guests, and I would thank the organizers for allowing us on drawing on the experience of the countries around the world and how to develop a coordinated national cybersecurity response to tackle the increasing threats to be resilience in cybersecurity. Thank you all, and we hope that our next meeting will be in better circumstances where we can meet face to face. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Engineer Leal. Ladies and gentlemen, I just request our esteemed panelists, there's one question which is coming from the audience, and we really like the audience engagement as well. So with all due permission of our eminent panelists, could we just extend a couple more minutes for an audience question? Is that okay with you? Okay, perfect. So I'm just posting this question, which has just come in. How can countries deal with the worldwide shortage of cybersecurity professionals? What do you think are the best practice trends in qualifying new professionals? That's one of the questions which is coming from our audience. Would any of you be comfortable to taking that on? I've just, okay, Kate, please go ahead. And then Henry.
Yeah, so I see this in government and in industry. The shortage is really there. We don't have enough cybersecurity people, and we won't. You're not going to grow them overnight. I do think a training program, things like the SANS Institute and other institutes that train people, are critical for companies and countries to do. So setting up a program where you can train the youth for the future. I have 16 grandchildren. I know I don't look that old, thank you. But those grandchildren are really good on the internet. They are natives, digital natives. So they're the future that can really help us in cybersecurity. But the biggest thing I think we can do to make up for that shortage is if you take those 90 companies that I mentioned earlier, each with 10 people that are head down looking at their own problem, and allow them to look up, instead of 90 companies, each with 10 people working to defend that one company, imagine if they worked together. That would be 900 people defending a sector and working with the National Cybersecurity Center and others. So I think there's a two-part set of capabilities here. Training the future youth in cyber, we can do that. Encourage them to get technical degrees like Engineer Layal has. And then also get people to work together. A collective defense strategy, I think, is the future in cybersecurity. If you think about the multiplayer online games, think how that works today, how good that is. And then look at how we do cyber. Every company's by itself. That doesn't make sense. We should work together. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Pierre. Henry, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, we recognize this was going to be a major issue, was a major issue in the UK some time ago. And our analysis led us to the view that the first thing to do was to encourage our young people to not just, as Keith has said, to do technical studies, more technical studies, technical degrees, but also to enthuse them about the possibility of a career in cybersecurity. And actually not just for those with deep technical knowledge, because there are a lot of careers in cybersecurity for those who have a broad range of backgrounds. And so we have created a program in the UK called Cyber First, which is all about encouraging school children from an age of about 12, although there are now programs being run at much earlier stages in primary schools, back to age about 8. But the main effort is taking children with a range of programs, a range of actually mainly out of school activities, and here industry is very important in supporting these, to get them really enthusiastic about the idea, to understand what the careers are, get them enthusiastic about taking their sort of native digital Keith was talking about, and really understanding how they can apply them or their interests to become cybersecurity professionals. There's a slightly mercenary element in this, in that we find that offering people significant financial bursaries, scholarships to study suitable subjects at university for the best ones, and giving them interesting work during the summer vacations really drives people forward. Then beyond that, it's all about creating professional career structures for cybersecurity professionals, both in terms of having the right frameworks for professional qualifications and really having the sort of making it a true profession in the way that many of the more traditional professions are professions. So that's how we're approaching it in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Henry. Conrad, any comments on that, please?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, so I think the first point I'd make is this real shortage, which is a critical shortage, is one of the key reasons why we need to be really efficient as governments and in the private sector in how we use the available resource we've got. So this brings us back to the National Cybersecurity Centre point. You know, we've got a shortage of resource. We need to, in government, we need to pool those experts where we can and not have them spread about in different organisations operating in an inefficient way. I think, as Henry said, for us in the UK, it's a lot about modernising our education system. So part of that is having these kind of cyber first schemes and so on that Henry talked about, which are essentially about kind of turbocharging education for young people in cyber. But part of it also is about looking at our fundamental national curriculum in our schools and making big changes to that. So it's more about technology and it's more about the skills that our young people need for the future. I think it's about governments accepting that they need to work with the private sector. Part of the reason of working with the private sector is being able to tap into the skills that exist in the private sector, again, to make most efficient use of your national and your international resource. And I think there's a role for the private sector as well, not just in supporting government education schemes, but in looking at their own schemes, setting up apprenticeship schemes in cyber, looking at ways that they can train young people themselves who will then come and work in their companies for a bit, but actually help with that training process. So again, it's a kind of whole of nation response. And at the moment, it's about being as efficient as we can be in the use of the resources that we've got. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Conrad. Engineer Lal, thank you for your time in moderating this. If you have any comment on the same, we'd be more than open for that. Engineer Leal, do you have any comment on the same?
I'll just give my comment on the question. I think also here in Kuwait, we have the shortage of cybersecurity professionals, especially with the delay of the cybersecurity program implementation. So we'll take it as a priority for us. What we can do is starting educating and teaching people, and the continuous of the training is important, and also educating the youth from the early stages, so we can ensure that we will have in the future more professional people in the cybersecurity. Thank you. That's all.